Did you know that Waiting for the Punchline by Extreme is their only album to feature drummer Mike Mangini? He played on 3 tracks: Hip Today, Leave Me Alone, and No Respect. If you didn't know, he was the drummer for the band Annihilator before this, and he was later the drummer for Dream Theater during the time that Mike Portnoy was not in the band. He joined Extreme because prior to the band's appearance at Donington's Monsters of Rock Festival in the summer of 1994, Paul Geary left the band to pursue a career in artist management. So Mike Mangini became the drummer, and Paul Geary was able to complete a few of the tracks before he left. So here's the agenda for this video. It's talking about Extreme, Waiting for the Punchline. Chapter 1 is going to be how the band faced 90s alternative rock and the grunge scene. Chapter 2 is talking about Waiting for the Punchline, their attempt at grunge. Chapter 3 is how God and religion are addressed on this album. Then chapter 4 is going to be Waiting for the Punchline track by track. Then number 5, I answer the question, can this band pull off grunge? So Waiting for the Punchline is their 4th album, released on January 19, 1995. It was different. It was more of a raw sounding album, definitely because of the influence from grunge. The previous albums, which I'll talk about in a minute, had this big production, but this one was different. It had a different sound. And the lyrics were different also. They were more about social matters, everything from religion to fame, and people consider this to be a concept album. A lot of this is about questioning the existence of God and a lot of that type of thing. Now, after this album's tour, Extreme disbanded. And Nuno Betancourt, he just said, I want to leave. And he wanted to pursue a solo career. He has a few solo albums, like the one I have on the screen here. And then we all know Gary Cherone. He joined Van Halen for that one album, Van Halen 3, which is considered to be like one of their worst albums, but he was only in Van Halen for a short time. And let's talk about the band Extreme and how they evolved into the 90s. So the first album came out in 1989. It was self-titled. I remember this. I was a big fan of it. This was around the time I was getting into heavy metal. Whenever like a new band came out and I saw them on either MTV or the radio, I would usually go pick up these CDs. And this one was pretty popular, reached number 80 on the Billboard 200. And there was a minor hit called Kid Ego. And there was also another minor hit called Play With Me. And this was on the soundtrack to Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. And this song, Play With Me, has also been featured recently on Season 4 of Stranger Things. And there was also part of Guitar Hero, one of the games called Guitar Hero Encore Rocks the 80s. I think that's a PlayStation 2 game, which I think I used to have. But then a year later, they released Extreme 2 in 1990, released on August 7, 1990. And this one did very well. This was their breakout album. It peaked at number 10 on the Billboard 200 and certified double platinum in the US. This one has the one song that everyone knows about, More Than Words. That one reached number 1. There was also another big single that I think people don't talk about that much. I feel like it hasn't really held up over the years, or I think it gets overshadowed by More Than Words. And that's the song Wholehearted, but another song that did very well. And they had a couple other songs, Decadence Dance, Get the Funk Out. Those were popular on MTV. They played them on Headbangers Ball. So now the 90s come. It's 1992. Grunge just happened like just now. So at this point, they're still doing their own thing. And they released 3 sides to every story. This one didn't do that well, but in my opinion, I think it's their best album because it just, the songs are awesome. They're experimenting. They're moving a little bit away from that glam metal. It has more like classic rock, some like Jimi Hendrix stuff. I really love this album. I need to do a full video on it, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But I believe this is their best album. But now it's the 90s, and the whole rock scene is starting to move away. You had bands like Motley Crue, Poison, Bon Jovi. Like, they were the biggest bands at that time. But then 1991 happens. Nirvana releases Smells Like Teen Spirit. And at that point, everything shifts. There was something about Kurt Cobain. It was unlike all this hair metal. I think he was a little more real. And he created this new grunge aesthetic. People were dressing differently. So instead of having all that big hair and the spandex, they were wearing the flannel and all that different stuff. So the record labels see this popularity, and they want to focus on bands the grunge bands, the Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains. And another thing people liked about the grunge was they were a little more real. They were talking about personal struggles instead of the whole rock and roll lifestyle with the partying and all that stuff. So by the time 1993 rolls around, all these glam metal or hair metal bands are being dropped by their labels. And the glam metal bands that are still on their labels are trying to adapt their sound to the current mainstream or whatever's popular, so they're trying to become more grungy, in other words. So some of these albums were good, some weren't good. So today we're talking about Waiting for the Punchline, and I want to discuss, could they pull off grunge? Because I think some of these bands were able to pull it off. But now let me go deeper into the album, because as I was talking about before, it's a concept album. A lot of it's about religion and skepticism and questioning faith and questioning the existence of God. And there's a lot of very deep stuff. So I'm going to dive deep into the lyrics. The opening track, the song title is right in your face. It's called There Is No God. Now this is something you would expect from a metal band that sings about this type of topic, but it's called There Is No God. And this is about somebody who is addressing somebody. They claim to be a Messiah, and they're basically questioning the existence of God. And this person is calling this other person, who is probably a religious figure, a blasphemous liar. And they make a lot of references to the Bible. So for example, they say Thomas wants some proof. That refers to doubting Thomas, who needed physical proof of Christ's resurrection. They have a line that says, generation seeks a sign. That kind of echoes biblical passages. And they also mention the blind leading the blind, a reference to Jesus' words about the Pharisees. There's another song called Evil Angelist. Now that's a play on words. It's evil, evangelist. This is something you would expect from either Ozzy Osbourne, Black Sabbath, and I know they've written similar songs. But it's about all these evangelists, the false prophets, and using religious imagery to exploit people. So this one has a lot of pretty cool lyrics. We have one line that says, little lamb, come out of the rain. This uses the Christian symbol of the sheep and the lambs. And also the cock crowed thrice, referring to Peter's denial of Jesus. Betrayed by a kiss. This references Judas' betrayal of Jesus. And they say wolves in sheep's clothing. This comes from Jesus' warning about the false prophets. There was another song called Fair Weather Faith. And this is about turning to religion or prayer only when facing difficulties. This was a song that was not on the American release, so it might not be on all different copies. If you listen to it on Spotify or streaming, like this particular song wasn't on there, but you can find it on YouTube. Somebody uploaded it. But basically they say things like pretending to act so serene, so-called submissive knees, and they also make references to the weather. They say, as soon as the sun don't shine your way, saving it all up for a rainy day. So they use a lot of metaphors, but then in the end, he says, I ain't talking about the weather. That kind of emphasizes that the song isn't really about the weather. It's about using weather as a metaphor for this conditional faith. So people are only faithful when it benefits them. That's basically the main idea. Before this, the main idea of this song. So let's dive deeper into this album. I'll go a little quicker now. I just want to go track by track and just talk more about the music. How did they change their music? So the opening track, like I said, There's No God, very in your face. It's just with that song title. This was very mid-90s, lots of alternative rock guitar with feedback. It still had a little bit of that funk. The guitars were still there, but more of a psychedelic sound. Next song is called Cynical, and this one had some of those funky vibes, but a little bit of grunge. I really like the drumming on this one. I think the drums stand out. But I think this was more of a typical extreme song as compared to the others. Tell Me Something I Don't Know. A very alternative rock, but more of that desert rock, stoner rock like the band Cayuse was doing in the early to mid-90s. That reminded me of that. Hip Today was one of the singles, and that one was more like classic extreme, but with alternative vibes. They had the catchy chorus. I think that was the song that was written to try to be the hit single. I don't think it was a hit, though. Another song, Naked, which is a slow and jazzy song. Very Smashing Pumpkins sounding, or like Candlebox, that types of alternative rock. A lot of bluesy solos. It was a pretty cool deep cut because it sounds very different. There's an instrumental called Midnight Express. This is like one of those Chris Cornell acoustic songs. I'm thinking like his solo album Euphoria or something from the Single soundtrack. Pretty cool. It had the bongos, Middle Eastern vibes, and Nuno Betancourt. He's playing an acoustic, but he's shredding solo on his acoustic guitar. So I thought that was a cool track. Leave Me Alone, another one, more alternative rock sounding. Reminded me of early Smashing Pumpkins, and a lot of people were saying that sounded like King's X. That was another big band during this time. There was No Respect, a very upbeat and funky bass guitar on that one. The bass guitar is really present on this album. I know in the first couple of albums there was more hair metal and you don't really hear the bass as much, but the bass is all over this album. Then I talked about Evangelist. That's like a darker song. I said it reminded me of like a Black Sabbath or Dio type of song, but it was kind of grungy, but a little darker. Then it was Shadowboxing. This was completely different. Reminded me of the band The Black Crowes. It was that blues rock. They had the cowbells, keyboards, more radio friendly. Then it was Unconditionally. This is their rock ballad. I don't think it was a hit, but it had that alternative rock sound, but it was the softer singing. They were going for a More Than Words type of song, but for the alternative rock radio, which I don't know if it was played, but it had that sound. Then I talked about Fairweather Faith, which is more of a heavy and funky alternative rock sounding. Their hidden track, which it was the 90s, all these bands did these hidden tracks. It was like several seconds of silence and then you hear another song. But this is actually a really good song because it had this cool instrumental section. Another one that was similar to the band King's X. It had a sound specifically from that album called Dogman, which is another good album I should probably talk about someday. That was a really good one. So in conclusion, could they pull off grunge? I think they did. I think this is one of the few albums from one of those, let me call them a hair metal or glam metal band, that I think they pull it off. I recently did an extreme ranking, and it's kind of hard to rank this band because I had this one fairly low, but I don't even know, it might even move up if I re-rank the albums because I thought this was really good. I enjoyed it like a lot more than I did like the last time I listened to it, which was maybe 1 or 2 years ago when I ranked Extreme. I'm going to stick that ranking video right here. You can watch it. Check it out. Also give the video a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.